Welcome to Future Forum's second research summit. Today, we're going to talk about collaboration and creativity, because over this past year, I think most of us have felt that we've been able to be just as or even more productive than when we were in the office. But there's been this looming question that many of us have had about whether or not we and our teams can innovate at the same level as before. And so we're going to do just that, unpack this in the data and with our 4 expert academics today. But before we dive in, my name is Helen Cupp, and I'm the director at the Future Forum, as well as your host for today's event. So what is the Future Forum? We're a research consortium that collects and analyzes data like employee preferences and organizational practices to help executives like you reinvent work and stay competitive. Our current focus is understanding what practices do and don't work for a more hybrid, flexible work environment. And we're a consortium that's backed by Slack, as well as our founding partners, Boston Consulting Group, Herman Miller, and Management Leadership for Tomorrow. So before we get started, just to keep things focused for today, we're asking everyone to send their questions and comments directly into this Zoom chat. You're also all invited into a private Slack channel where we hope that we can continue these conversations after the event, and also a place where we'll be sharing recaps, notes, and videos after the event. So let's get started. First, what comes to mind when you think of creative work environments? Probably something like this, a meeting room with Post-its and visuals and people throwing out ideas on whiteboards live together. Because when I think about creativity, at least I often think about situations that involve some level of group brainstorming. And I've talked to many leaders who've said, okay, maybe we can do some type of work remotely, but we'll definitely need to be back in a room to be creative and to collaborate. But is that really the only way that we can be creative at work? We wanted to dig into the data and ask, is this true? So on the Future Forum, we surveyed 760 US-based knowledge workers to understand this better. And we saw that creativity is a little bit more nuanced than a simple group brainstorm. There's really 2 types of creativity. First, individual creativity and group creativity. And you need both to have breakthrough ideas at work. And what we saw in the data was that even though we might have been worried about creativity during this year of remote work, we actually saw that nearly 75% of knowledge workers believe that their ability to come up with new solutions or ideas is about the same or better than in the office. I think about my own ability to work independently and give things more thought before jumping into a brainstorm or a meeting as an introvert. And I can understand why so many of us feel this way. But our research also validates what many of us have been feeling anecdotally about group creativity, the second piece of creativity. We might have been able to hunker down and get work done, but more than half of knowledge workers in our study agree that they feel overall less connected to other teams, which is important for long-term group creativity as a source of fresh ideas and perspectives. But there's a caveat. While we think that we need to be in the same room and on that whiteboard, our research also shows that it's not about bringing people back into a room to brainstorm on these whiteboards. Our research shows that where your colleagues work have no bearing on how creative you feel your team is. You'll see in this chart, we see similar percentages of people who agree that their team is just as successful at being innovative, no matter if their colleagues were remote full-time, in the office in-person full-time, or some mix of these 2. And what this tells us is that as leaders, we need to be focused on building more cross-functional connections and social cohesion in different ways, not just fall back on the office as a crutch. Think about things like encouraging your teams to bring in different people to guest speak at team meetings, or creating cross-functional teams for new projects. And as we think about ways to use shared space, how can we be intentional about creating social cohesion and connectivity, not just space for brainstorming? A lot of studies, including our own, show that people don't want to go back to being in the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Leaders are planning for a more flexible hybrid work now and building on everything that we've learned over this last year about how to create a work environment that's more inclusive, flexible, and connected, and in a way that engages and tracks the best employees. Similarly, as leaders, we have this massive opportunity to embrace new ways of fostering innovation. And done right, this new age of flexible work can really be a golden age of creativity. So with that, let me pass the mic over to my co-host, Mark Rivera, to walk through today's agenda and introduce our esteemed guests.
Thank you, Helen. My name is Mark Rivera. I am a member of the research team here at SLAC. My pronouns are he, him. We have an exciting lineup for you all today. We've created space for two big things. In the first part of the session, we're going to have research overviews from a really outstanding set of academics. This is going to be an opportunity for us to ground ourselves in what we know about effective collaboration and teamwork and creativity. We're going to have a quick break and then jump into breakout discussions. Those discussions are meant to be a space where we can talk about the future, about things we might not necessarily know yet, but that could come to pass as we hopefully move to a post-pandemic, at least post-vaccine future of work. As Helen said, we have room to be optimistic, and this can be an opportunity for us to talk about how we can handle some of the challenges, but also jump on some of the opportunities that will be presented. I encourage everybody throughout all of today to post questions and comments in the Zoom chat, and then we'll have opportunity for discussion during the breakout sessions. It's interesting to think, if you step back a little, that whether any of us intended to be, we've all just taken part in an enormous experiment about work. Sometime about a year ago, I'm guessing most of us put our laptops in our bags at the office and left work, and maybe we haven't been co-located with our colleagues since. That is a tremendous amount of change in a short period of time. And we know that amidst change, there's opportunity. Right now, there's a global conversation that in one way or another, all companies and industries and economies are a part of. And that conversation is what the future of work could look like. As Helen mentioned, I think there's room to be optimistic that maybe we don't just get back to where the status quo was, but we can get to somewhere better. If one of the big challenges of change is that people can be stuck in the past, now's a time when we're relatively free from norms and habits of conventions of how we were used to work. We're fortunate to ground our conversations today about the future work with the expertise of a really renowned set of academics. Professors Brian Uzzi from Northwestern University, Poppy McLeod from Cornell, Heidi Gardner from Harvard, and Anita Woolley from Carnegie Mellon will be sharing some big ideas in a moment. We've asked each of them to share one insight, one big thought from their research or research around things that they've done about how people collaborate together, how people become creative, and the things that lead to breakthroughs in all of our work. It's an awesome opportunity to hear from this group. I'm personally very excited. I encourage all of you, as you're listening to their talks, to think about some of the concepts and dynamics that they bring up and keep an eye out for opportunities to improve your teams and organizations. Later in the day, we'll have time to build on some of those ideas in our discussions. With that, I'm very excited to hand it over to Brian Uzzi, who I've personally learned a lot from in my own career, who will share from a wealth of knowledge, research, and collaboration. Brian, take it away.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you to everyone out there for inviting me here today. It's really an honor. And hello to everyone out there. And thank you for spending some of your time with my colleagues and I to hear about our thoughts on things. When I look out at this audience, I'm really very impressed when I look at the quality of everyone out there. And I think, man, a lot of people are struggling with these ideas of collaboration. Let me share with you one of the ways in which I've tried to approach this in my own work. And I want to talk about something known as the 90-10 rule that came out of some research I did. And it's basically the idea as follows. You want to be creative, but what does it mean to be creative? How you need a target to get to. Once you know what your target is, then you have to think about the vehicle that gets you there best. The 90-10 rule tells you what you want your creative product to look like. Then you can figure out the best way to get there. And my own journey in this goes back about 20 years when I stumbled upon a piece of research that was looking at something that had nothing to do with collaboration. It looked at what was known as the lone genius model of creativity. And the person who was really looking at this was a sociologist at the University of Pennsylvania named Randall Collins. He writes this incredible book called The Sociology of Philosophies. Doesn't have a great title, but it's full of tremendous insight. And basically what he does is he does this monumental task where he goes back through all recorded Eastern and Western societies, and he looks to see where did the great ideas come from, the really big innovations. And, you know, he looks at just about everything. He looks at like, you know, the fugitive poets, the 7 sages of antiquity. He looks at Einstein. He looks at Marie Curie. He looks at Edison. He looks at Susan Finley, who was a great innovator, got us to the moon. Without her, we wouldn't have stepped on another celestial body. The Funk Brothers, who, if you haven't heard of them, you actually have, because they've created more hit singles than the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Beach Boys, and Elvis Presley put together. They were the creative group that essentially produced all the great Motown music. And what Randall Collins touches on was phenomenal to me. He goes back to recorded history and says, guess what? When I look at all of this, the lone genius isn't the one that moves the needle. What moves the needle is collaboration, whether you talk about a network, a team, or a salon, which was what it was called back in the 1800s. And in starting this research, the first thing that I wanted to look at is a real giant piece of creativity. And what it is Darwin's Origin of Species. I don't know, any of you looked at this book, but, you know, it really changed the way we think about everything, the economy, society, biology. And it's got really a giant idea. And the giant idea is natural selection. And I thought when I picked up this book, it would be about natural selection. And when I looked at it, however, it actually was not. Most of that book is full of conventional, well understood, taken for granted knowledge. The first third is about the breeding of dogs. It wasn't controversial at all. The next third was about the breeding of cattle. The next third was about the breeding of birds. Only in the last 75 pages does he put out this fantastical new and creative idea. That got me thinking, why? Because that idea is so contrary to the orthodoxy of most innovation. Most people think about innovation about being on a scale like I'm showing you here. We have knowledge, and we've got really extreme conventional knowledge and really extreme knowledge that's novel, stuff people haven't seen before. And what you're trying to do is kind of find an area that kind of isn't too conventional, it isn't too novel. It's sometimes called the Goldilocks, you know, so it's not too hot, not too cold, it's just right. Well, what Darwin did was the opposite. Darwin got extreme conventionality, the breeding of dogs, the breeding of cattle, and he put it right next to extreme novelty. And that was the secret, as we saw it, of his ability to have this giant effect on how we think about things. So what we decided to do was to test both Collins and Darwin at the same time. And what we did is we went out into the world and we got as much big data as we possibly can to find out if these case studies replicated more broadly. We looked at 26 million scientific papers, 2 million patents, and 20 million pop songs. And what we did is we coded each one of these creative products in terms of whether they were more like Goldilocks or whether they were putting together extreme conventionality and extreme novelty. So it wasn't Goldilocks, it was hyper plus hyper. And basically we found 3 things that changed my way of looking at the world. We found that networks and team collaboration, not individuals, are in fact the driving force of the greatest steps forward. Creativity follows this universal 90-10 rule. Whether we looked at science, technology, or art, it's getting this extreme conventionality, just like Darwin did, and putting in a little bit of novelty. And the best way to get there is through collaboration. Why? Because collaborative environments are the best at being able to find pieces of novelty, that is, ideas that haven't been put together before, and marrying them with extreme conventionality. So whether you put your teams together at work, organizing an entire organization, finding ways in which you can get people to shoot for the 90-10 rule and having a collaborative structure that gets you there is the secret that we found in our research. I'll leave you with one last thing to think about. And it's not only your teams, it's about you. You as an individual, we all could run out of creativity. I don't have time to talk about this case, but I will encourage you to look at it. It's well documented on the web. Look up someone known as Max Martin. You might say, I don't really think I know that name. He's known as the Swedish musical miracle. He has probably gotten more music awards than any other person on the planet. He writes songs for other people. And he had two pieces of his career. The first part of his career where he basically collaborated with about a dozen people. And then he appears to completely run out of steam. His calendar went completely white. What does he do to remake himself? He creates a new network. And instead of collaborating with 18 people, he then collaborates with 108 different artists. And when he does that, he goes on to win or be nominated for 22 Grammy Awards. He is an all-time winner. And those Grammy Awards are not him, they're him and his collaborators. So when you think about creativity, what are you shooting for? The 90-10 rule. And how do you get there? Through collaboration. Poppy, I'm done. I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Brian. That was fascinating. And hello, everyone. I'm Poppy McLeod, joining you on one of the rare sunny days in Ithaca, New York, from where I study communication and social influence in teams. And one of my specific research areas is how people develop teamwork skills. The idea that I want to share with you today concerns the ongoing quest to define, discover, and attain excellence in teamwork. And I argue that the reason it remains so elusive is due to an inherent asymmetry in our knowledge about what predicts outcomes of teamwork. Here's what I mean by that. The formal science of studying teamwork has been going on for over a century. And as you can imagine, the number of studies that have been done through that period, both in academic and in industry settings, numbers in the thousands, probably the tens of thousands. What have we learned from all of this investigation? Well, we pretty much know for sure what leads to failure. This set of factors is well defined, and it is a near guarantee that your team will fail when these factors are present. But what conclusions can we reach about the factors that lead to excellence? So first, you may have noticed that so far I have not used the word success. My research on how we teach teamwork skills suggests that we are mostly teaching people how not to fail. I see this clearly in the two populations I've been studying most recently, that is healthcare teams and student teams. In the healthcare area, teamwork success is defined in terms of error avoidance. And of course, that is an important outcome for healthcare teams. But should error avoidance be the standard for excellence? Among students, the most common teamwork skill they develop is how to endure for a semester through a group project. They learn that getting into a successful team is a matter of luck. And when I ask them, very few of them say they would know how to reproduce the success experience, let alone excellence, in future teams. Even in executive education classes, I'm most frequently asked for tips and advice on how to remove these failure factors. So I therefore ask the question of whether teams in today's organizations are mostly happy with not failing. Is not failing seen as success and even perhaps excellence? Part of the problem in predicting success is that, next slide, here we go, is that successes are single outcomes to particular events, and any single event is surrounded by myriad uncontrollable factors. Avoiding the path to failure is more clearly mapped out than walking the path to success. Take the example of the popular notion of psychological safety. Well, what feels safe in one team may feel very unsafe in another. So to move teams away from accepting the standard of not failing and towards striving for excellence, I think we need to absorb the truth that there simply is no single formula leading to success, in the same way that there is a clear formula leading to failure. But that doesn't mean that excellence is out of teams' control. Elimination of the failure factors are merely the table stakes, the strong platform that will support a team's reach for excellence. The team needs to define on its own terms what excellence is, and I believe this requires a discerning mindset on the part of team members, which involves being adaptable, flexible, and a certain degree of vigilance, which means not taking anything for granted. They can't take their relationships with each other for granted and need to be willing and able to change routines and communication structures in response to changing circumstances. And so in conclusion, I give Mark the credit for my conclusion, and that is, I think that teams, we need to think about them being the obverse of the famous first line of Anna Karenina, which says, happy families are all alike and every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And so successful teams are each successful in their own way. Thank you, and I turn it next to Heidi.
Thanks so much, Poppy, and thanks, Brian, as well, for your insights. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I have been studying this topic of smart collaboration since I arrived at Harvard well over a decade ago. And I think that what we are seeing right now is an explosion of the two forces that make smart collaboration ever more important. I think of it as a business imperative, a societal imperative. So there's two trends. One of them is something that I'm sure is very familiar to you, specialization. Everyone from Malcolm Gladwell to historians of medicine talk about specialization or even hyper-specialization. Knowledge is changing so fast that most of us become narrower and deeper experts in a domain. But at the same time, the countervailing force is that our problems are increasingly VUCA. Do you know this acronym, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous? Another way to think of it is just big, hairy, messy, complicated problems. But when you put those two trends together, narrow, deep experts and big, multifaceted problems, it's why you need experts to join forces and tackle those complex issues that none of them could do on their own. That's what we mean by smart collaboration. So for any of you who dares to call collaboration a soft topic, we wanted to bring a bit of science and math and data and analytics behind the study of this and really show you what we can get out of truly smart collaboration. It's not big group hugs or pulling everyone together all the time just because we're trying to cover our backsides or reach consensus. It really is a deliberate, intentional act to solve complex problems that none of us could do on our own. And whenever you think about innovation, that is almost by definition a complex problem. We need people who are brilliant at the kind of creativity, blue sky thinking, making connections across unusual domains. Those are kind of one type of person. Our research, we've developed a psychometric tool that can measure this, and our research says there are types of people who strongly prefer and they're attracted to that kind of big, complicated problem. But there are also people who are concrete thinkers, the pragmatists, the ones who annoy the complex thinkers by raising their hand and saying, but wait, how's that going to work? And innovation is way beyond creativity. Innovation is creativity applied. And that's why we need people who are complex thinkers and concrete thinkers to join forces. It's not just people who know different things, it's people who know things differently. Okay, so I promised you some data. What's happening there? We wanted to understand amongst all of these millions and millions of data records that we've collected from organizations around the world, we were able to dig into them with one of my brilliant research associates, and they found two people who are so close to one another, we joke that they're twins. And they worked in the same company, they had the same role, they had graduated from grad school the same year, so we thought they were about the same age. Lots of demographic and professional characteristics that made them very, very similar to one another. And what we did, and Brian and many of you will be used to seeing these kinds of network diagrams. If you're not familiar with them, what you see is that every dot on your screen that's appearing now it represents a senior level manager in a particular company. Remember, both Twin 1 and Twin 2 work for the same company. Twin 1 is the one who's circled. They both happen to be men, so I say he. And what you see here is that he's collaborated with, I think it's 6 other people in his company, also at a similarly senior level. And they're color coded, so you can see that they're in different departments, some from him, different, some are the same as him. The lines connecting them signify, in this case, that they've worked on the same project or the same deal or the same engagement for a significant material amount of time. Now take a look at Twin 2. Remember, very similar person, had the same amount of time inside this organization to build his internal network, but look how he's spending his time. Brian, this reminds me of Max Martin. Twin 1 is kind of like the before picture, then he went blank for a while and he came back and became Twin 2, like reinvented himself like this. Well, where's the so what? The so what is we were able to look at their business outcomes, not their individual outcomes, but the revenues and profits and other kinds of financials associated with the teams where either Twin 1 or Twin 2 was the leader. And here's what we found. Order of magnitude, Twin 2 was more than 4 times more productive than Twin 1. And a lot of that in the further studies that we dug into, this is really just a snapshot, a picture in time. But we've got econometric models built up from these millions of data records that we show causal relationships. Just like Brian gave you that example with Max, when people develop purposeful networks, they use them in a smart collaboration way to team up with people who have complementary knowledge bases, different ways of thinking, maybe different kinds of life backgrounds. They're able to make these connections as big, complex thinkers, and they're able to find people in their network who think differently from them, the concrete thinkers who can bring the blue sky creativity down to earth and apply it. And that's what innovation is. So we can show you loads of data like this. Smart collaboration results in these kinds of quantifiable outcomes, and innovation is definitely one of them. I have the great pleasure now of turning it over to my colleague and good friend, Anita Woolley.
Thank you. I'm also pleased to be here and really excited to get to talk with all of you and share a little bit about what we're thinking about, but also to hear about your experience, because as was mentioned earlier, all of us are kind of getting a crash course in some of this at the same time. So I'm going to just share with you a couple of things that are coming out of our recent research, and happy to talk more in the breakout sessions that will follow. So in our research, we look at collective intelligence in groups. And this is this underlying idea that groups have an ability to perform together across a wide range of tasks. And this is a definition of intelligence that generalizes across individual psychology, artificial intelligence, intelligence in other complex systems. And this is the approach that we use for capturing it in interacting groups as well. And so we find that a group's collective intelligence not only predicts a variety of performance in different kinds of tasks, but also how creative they are and how well they make use of the creative talents of their members. We find that collective intelligence is less related to individual intelligence than we might have thought, and much more related to a variety of other things about the group. We find that it's related to a variety of forms of diversity, such as gender diversity, ethnic diversity, and cognitive diversity. And we find that it is related to the ability of the group to collaborate, their social intelligence. Specifically, one attribute is social perceptiveness, which involves the ability to pick up on subtle nonverbal cues, such as facial expression, and draw correct inferences about what others are thinking or feeling. And what we find is that when groups have more socially perceptive people in them, they engage in other behaviors that we have found are associated with collective intelligence. But one thing that has been very interesting to us over time is that groups seem to establish collective intelligence very early, even when they didn't know each other beforehand, and it tends to remain stable and predict performance several weeks and sometimes months later. So we were interested in how or why this could be, and if there is, maybe a deep structure to how some groups develop it, as we talk about chemistry in teams, right? Is this something that develops really quickly based on maybe some things that people aren't really even aware are happening? So this got us starting to thinking about synchrony, which is a behavior that has been explored in a variety of settings and has been shown to indicate how well people are coordinating with their interaction partners. One form of synchrony that is innate to humans and even non-human primates is the tendency to synchronize facial expressions with interaction partners. And so we found that the degree to which collaborators synchronize their facial expression is predictive of CI, even when they're collaborating via video conference. We also have looked at vocal synchrony and actually have recently found that vocal synchrony is even more predictive of collective intelligence, and sometimes actually using video conferencing can undermine this by disrupting collaborators' tendency to synchronize their vocal cues. Our additional studies of communication have looked at the patterns over time in which people communicate. And one pattern that shows up in a variety of contexts is this idea of burstiness. Communication is bursty when there are periods of quick exchange of information or conversation separated by periods of little communication where members are working independently. So what we have seen is that the more bursty teams tend to be more innovative and to perform at a higher level. And again, this is true even in, for example, software teams that are distributed around the globe, working over a period of weeks, or retail banking teams where some members were co-located and others were remote. So we are continuing to look at burstiness in a variety of settings, as well as other forms of synchrony, and thinking about, as we go back to figuring out how to manage this hybrid work environment, how we can help more teams foster synchrony, maybe via burstiness, and hopefully develop collective intelligence in more organizations. So thanks a lot, and I look forward to talking more with you about this as we head into the breakout sessions. So I guess I hand it over to Mark now.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you also, Brian, Poppy, and Heidi. That is a fantastic start to today's sessions. I think will be great fodder for our discussion panels. So right now we'll have a quick 5-minute break, and we will magically be moving your digital location into the discussion sessions. When you come back, you may need to click on your screen to actually make that transition happen. See you all in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. It looks like we're all trickled back into the main room. Before I wrap us up, our team is going to send out a quick Zoom feedback poll. It should only take a few seconds to complete, and this is going to help us continue to improve on these events for all of you. So thanks in advance for giving us feedback. As I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, we'll be sharing all the event recaps and videos into the private Slack event channel. I encourage all of you to jump in and continue the conversations that we've had today, or just use the channel as a way to connect with your peers in this event who might have sparked an idea for you. We'll have that channel up for probably another week or two to ensure that you all have an opportunity to access the content and conversations. And I see lots of answers trickling into the Zoom poll, so thank you. So to wrap, I just want to take a moment and say thank you all for joining this conversation with us about collaboration and creativity in a hybrid workplace. Special thanks to our academic experts, Brian, Heidi, Poppy, and Anita, for leading the discussions today. And of course, to my co-host and moderator, Mark Rivera. Today, we had an opportunity to debunk some myths about creativity that you might have all walked in with, and talked about how important it is to expand our networks even as we're working in a more hybrid remote environment, as well as how do we start to build trust on teams, and think about ways to set our teams up for success, whether we are in office, remote, or some mix of the two. More importantly, I hope that this discussion has given you some ideas and lessons that you're able to take back to your organizations today and experiment with. So thank you all again for joining us. I'm so excited that we've been able to have this conversation together. Thank you all.